National Affairs correspondent at The Nation, John Nichols, is here with us to discuss the recent bet Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has placed on New Hampshire to boost his presidential bid, and what we can expect to see happen in the 2024 Democratic primary. Welcome. I want to kick it off. Oh, thanks for coming on. I want to kick it off with a quote from RFK Jr. talking about the reasons for his run. And I want to ask you what kind of purchase that still has in the Democratic Party. He says, quote, he's against the corrupt merger between state and corporate power. That sounds to me like sort of old school Democrat message. I'm thinking back, all the way back to like 2008. You have some of these anti-war, like kind of Ralph Nader-esque, right? How much purchase does that view still have in the Democratic Party when a lot of the party establishment seems very comfortable with the merger between corporate power and agency power, government power?
That's a great question. And I think you could even trace it back a lot further to Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal era, when Roosevelt talked a lot about those precise issues. So historically, the Democratic Party had an understanding that the merger between corporate power and governing was a dangerous thing. And I think that's still very alive within the party at the grassroots. Certainly, I think that powered a lot of Bernie Sanders' challenge to the party establishment in 2016 and in 2020. And certainly there are a number of people in Congress who would certainly embrace that position. But I think that at the establishment level, no, there's a great discomfort with those who want to, kind of fundamentally move the party toward a more progressive populist position.
So you actually say that he's focusing on New Hampshire. And my question is, a lot of the discussion in the Democratic Party has been that New Hampshire is no longer a bellwether because it's not as diverse a state as, say, South Carolina or some of the other states. And my question, do you think that it is really a good state for RFK Jr. to really stake his claim in? I understand that, he has the name recognition and all that, but it not being necessarily a bellwether. And we can look at, even you could argue that it was never a bellwether. I mean, Paul Tsongas won it in 1992 over Bill Clinton. Bernie Sanders has won it twice and unable to actually get the nomination. Is this really a place where he should start his campaign?
Well, remember, Kennedy is starting very much as an outsider. Right? Mm-hmm. He is starting as someone who has that name recognition that you're talking about, and has some history. Right? He's somebody who has been known as an environmentalist over the years, but his recent history, particularly his skepticism as regards vaccines, made him a very controversial figure. And so he necessarily, if he's going to make this run, needs to start where he thinks he can have his strongest run. My sense is because the Kennedy name, is historically rooted in New England, there is a calculation there that New Hampshire might be a spot where he could get some traction. Now, if you ask that deeper question, and that is New Hampshire the right place to begin a presidential race, particularly in the Democratic Party? No, there's a lot of reasons why there are places that would be better. And South Carolina's got the concession currently, but there are people who've made a very strong case for a state like Michigan, which has a lot of diversity and also which is a historic battleground state. So, yeah, I think that in this case, what you're looking at with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and also with Marianne Williamson, another person who's announced a candidacy, is a sense that because New Hampshire has been taken off the core Democratic list, it's sort of now a state that is forcing its way into the process and into the early part of the process, that it might be a place for them to get a stronger showing than they might get otherwise, and then from there to build on that. I think that's the theory. Mm.
Yeah, let's talk about that Kennedy name, right? Remember, way back in 2010, you have Scott Brown over in Massachusetts saying it's not the Kennedy seat, it's the people's seat with regard to the Senate seat held by Ted Kennedy. How long, I mean, this is obviously a famous Democratic Party name. Do you think that it actually is a significant aid to him, to Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s run? Or do you think that within the Democratic Party even in New Hampshire or in the Northeast, that Kennedy name is of a dynasty that's sort of long disappeared?
I think that is a superb question because that goes right to the heart of the matter. There is no question that the Kennedy name has resonance within the Democratic Party and more broadly. Look, we're talking about him right now. And so there's something about it that does get attention and gets noticed. But if you'll recall, in just a few years ago, Kennedy ran for the U.S. Senate seat in a primary against Ed Markey, and the senator from Massachusetts, and lost that primary pretty badly. And there's a lot of evidence that the Kennedys are no longer as politically potent as they were, say, in the 1960s, even in the 1970s. And even there, I'll remind you that Ted Kennedy challenged Jimmy Carter in 1980 and lost. So there's a lot of reason to believe that the Kennedy name doesn't have quite the traction that it once had. And also, again, because Robert F. Kennedy has been such a controversial figure, and because many of the positions he's taken, particularly as regards vaccines, have put him outside of, I think, the circle of a lot of mainstream Democrats, that becomes an even greater challenge.
So you kind of alluded to, and Inez as well, is that RFK Jr. is kind of like an old school Democrat populist, and that's the kind of campaign that he may run. My question is the environment for that crowd, because I'm thinking about people like, like a Tulsi Gabbard who ran in 2020. My question is that really a winning issue for that populist audience that he could probably attract in a state like New Hampshire? Is the environment just something that is more, something that the youth of the party are more interested in, that some of these older, whiter members of the party in New Hampshire may not be quite as engaged in?
It's a very good question. Look, here's what I would suggest to you. That it appears that young voters, by and large, if you look at the polling data, are more inclined toward a progressive populist position, right? They voted, they gave a lot of the heft to Bernie Sanders' campaigns. They've been very involved in the campaigns of many of the folks who are in the squad. So I think there's a lot of argument that that there's a base for a progressive populist message. The challenge on it at this point is multifold. First and foremost, the Democrats have a president who's in office right now. And while he is, I don't think, identified with the left of the party, he clearly has been, on many issues, respectful of some of the stances that the left has taken. And I'm not sure that there is such a big inclination to look for an alternative. Polling does suggest, however, that there's a substantial number of Democrats who'd be interested in having another candidate than Joe Biden, someone else as their nominee. That's in New Hampshire, that's across the country. And the question really is whether Robert F. Kennedy Jr. would be that candidate. And I think that there's a number of reasons why it might be very difficult for him to claim that position. It might be much easier for a sitting member of Congress, for a sitting senator, if one of those folks wanted to make the challenge. The reality, though, is there's very little evidence that any prominent Democratic elected official is going to make a run in 2024 against Joe Biden.
How do you think RFK Jr.'s anti-war stance plays into his ability to gain those exact voters that we've been talking about, the progressive populist voters who might be frustrated with the Biden administration on foreign policy matters?
Oh, I think that an anti-war stance has historically had a lot of traction in Democratic primaries and caucuses. If you look back, go back to 2008, there was a lot of reasons why Barack Obama took off, in 2007. One of the reasons was that he had been a critic of the rush to war in Iraq way back in 2002. And then you go back to the Eugene McCarthy campaigns, the George McGovern campaigns. There's always a constituency for an anti-war stance. And interestingly, I'm not sure it's entirely on the left. I think there are people in the center and the right. Issues of war and peace are more complex. But again, the question becomes, is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The most effective candidate to carry that position into the 2024 primaries? Or is someone like a Marianne Williamson, who did run in 2020, or is there someone else who might step up? One important thing to remember is, particularly in the New Hampshire primary, you can file for that primary very late. I mean, so we're talking now in the spring of 2023 about who might be on that ballot. When you get to 2024, you could see any number of folks decide to make a run. And again, we're talking about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. today because he's got the name Kennedy, right? That is his biggest claim, and also because he does have a history. People know of him historically as being an environmental activist, more recently as a vaccine skeptic, but also a critic of the pharmaceutical companies. And it's just a question of whether he will be the vehicle for a protest vote. And that's one interesting dynamic there in New Hampshire and in many other states. A candidate who is positioning himself as somebody you might vote for, not because you necessarily even want that person to be president, but it might be a way to send a message. That has some potency politically.
Yeah. So thank you so much, John. I'll see you at the family reunion. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back with more Rising.
Thank you so much.